네, 자리를 정돈해 주시기 바랍니다. 회의 세션을 시작합니다.
Okay, then we will start the first session. Hello, I am Jueonju from the Hanshin University who will be the moderator for the session 1. Under the title of the digital transformation and the platform labor, we will have the session for 110 minutes. First, okay, let me take off my mask. First, let me invite the professor, the Nathan Schneider, from the University of Colorado, Boulder, which is a very beautiful place. So please welcome him with a big round of applause for his first presentation. Are you ready?
네, 지금 인터넷 접속이 원만치
Sorry,
않아서
due to the technical
네.
problem,
네이튼 슈나이더 교수님 발제를 뒤로 미루고
maybe we
네,
put
우리
the Nathan's
두
presentation
번째 발제를 해주실 박광철
later,
전주
and
기전대학교 교수님
we will invite the Gwangcheon Park
노동의 전주
first
지역의 실태에
to
대해서
know about the current
조사하신
status
결과를
of the platform cooperatives in Jeonju.
공유하도록 하겠습니다. 우리 박광철 교수님 모시도록
Professor
하겠습니다.
Park, please come up to the stage.
그리고 나서 준비되면
And then, if we're ready with
두 번째나 세 번째 우리 슈나이더
Schneider,
교수님 발제를
we will listen
다시 듣도록 하겠습니다.
to him as the second or third presentation.
예, 갑자기 일찍 나오게 돼서
This is quite
이상하긴 하지만
unexpected.
열심히 해보도록
I'll
하겠습니다.
try my best.
전주 기전대학의
Hello, I am
광철입니다.
Park Gwang-cheol
인사 먼저
from the
드리겠습니다.
University of Kijeon College in Jeonju.
좀 기다렸다 하면 되나요? 예, 감사합니다.
Okay.
이 발표는 2021년
So my presentation is
플랫폼 노동자
based on
실태조사
the
연구를 제가 진행을
2021
했었는데요.
survey
그
on the
결과를
employment and working
가지고
conditions of platform
여러분들에게
workers.
알려드리려고
So let me share the results with you
있었습니다.
today.
연구 조사를 진행하기 전에는 저도
Before
플랫폼
the
노동자들이
survey and
어떤
research,
상황에서
I
그리고
didn't really understand the
조건에서
situation
일하는지에
of
대해서
platform
잘 알지
laborers
못했습니다.
and the working conditions.
연구를 진행하면 진행할수록
And
이
as
사회
I
변화 속도라는
went further into
속도에만
research,
우리가 관심을 가졌지
I thought
실제
that we are only interested in the speed of the
생활을
social change,
해나가는 사람들의
not really
어려움은
on
어디서
the
일어나고
difficulties
있고
posed
그들이 처한 노동
on the
현장의 상황은
people
어떤지에
and their
대해서
labor conditions.
제대로 알고 있지 못하다는 그러한 생각을 가지게 됐습니다. 결국 공동체라는 것이 사람을 위한
In the end, a community
그리고 사람이 살아가기
is
위한
for the people
또한
and to enable the
공간이
quality
되어야
of
되고
lives for the
터전이 되어야
people.
되는데 우리에게 플랫폼 노동이 주는 긱 노동이 주는
And in this regard,
이
platform labor
불합리성과
and gig
부정형성이 어떻게 삶을
poses the
만들고 있는가에
issue
대해서
of
한 번쯤 되돌아보는 시간이
instability
됐으면
and
좋겠습니다.
lack of
준비가
structures,
됐습니까?
which we need to talk about. So are
그럼
we ready?
시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Okay, let me begin.
본 연구는 전주시 의뢰로 2021년
So we were commissioned by Jeonju City in
9월까지
2021,
했던
and the
조사고요.
survey was
그래서
between July and September of
현황에
the
대한
year.
이야기가 주로 이루어질
It will be
거라고
mostly
생각합니다.
on
그래서
the current status
여러분들께서
of platform workers.
고민하시고 그리고 연구하시는
So I
과제의
hope
기초 자료가
this could be the
됐으면 하는
basis
바람으로
of your future
말씀을
research.
드리겠습니다. 구체적으로는 전주시에 거주하면서
Specifically, the subject
플랫폼
of the
특수고용
survey
노동자라고
were
불리울
the
수
platform
있는
workers that
5개
reside in
직종.
Jeonju.
그러니까
So we have designated 5
우리가 보통 배달 앱이라고
professions.
그러죠. 배달 노동자.
The
그다음에
delivery workers for delivery apps,
예. 예. 알겠습니다.
okay?
그다음에 이제 간병인, 그다음에
the
학습지 교사
caretakers,
등을 대상으로 해서
private tutors.
실제 조사를 했고요.
So they were the subject of our survey.
그 결과물을 가지고 지금부터
So
말씀드리도록
from
하겠습니다.
now
이쪽을
on, I will
누르면
share the results.
넘어간다고 했는데
So I will use this
넘어가나요?
clicker to move the slides.
안 넘어가는데.
I don't think it's working.
예, 됐습니다.
Okay, now it's working.
예, 보시다시피 특수고용 플랫폼
So as you
노동자들은
see, the
아직까지도
workers on
어디까지가 플랫폼 노동자인지에 대해서도 우리가
special
합의하지 못했던 직종들이 굉장히 많습니다.
type
그래서 사실
work
보다시피
platform,
방문
we don't have an
판매 또는
agreement who are the
자동차
platform
판매원까지도
workers. So
사실은
it actually
플랫폼 노동자로
includes
포함시켜야
the
되는가
door-to-door
아닌가에
sales
대해서 논란이 벌어지고 있는 것이
representatives
사실입니다.
or even
그러나
auto
우리가 이제
dealers.
보통 보고 있는
So there's a controversy on the
퀵
definition
서비스
of platform
혹은
workers.
배달 노동자의
We also
경우만
have
생각하고
career
있는데 사실은
services
직종이
or
훨씬 더
delivery
광범위하고
services,
넓다고 볼
and these
수가
are the
있어요. 왜
general
그러냐면
ideas of
플랫폼
platform
노동의
workers,
특징
but
중에 하나가
the scope is really much larger
계약에 의한
because
고용
one
형태가
of the key
보장되지 않는 것.
characteristics of
그리고
platform workers is there is
기한이
a lack of
짧은
guaranteeing of
그러한
the
형태로 되어
labor
있는 것. 그다음에
type,
4대 보험에
and they
가입되지
work
않는
for
것으로
only a short
분류를
period
해보면
of time,
상당히
and
진폭이
they're not
큽니다. 그래서 여러 가지
given the
형태의
four social
플랫폼 노동이
insurances.
존재한다. 이렇게 생각해
So
주시면
under
되고요.
this definition, we can see a lot of types of
이러한 플랫폼
platform
노동의
workers.
증가는 2020년 코로나19가 시작된 이후
So since the outbreak of the
양질의
pandemic in
일자리가
2020,
사라지면서
the
또는
number of
기존에
platform workers increased due
정형화된
to
일자리가
the
사라지면서
disappearance of
노동자들이
structured
대거
work and
플랫폼
regular
노동으로
work. We
이동하게 되는
saw
현상
a
속에서
massive migration
플랫폼
to
노동이 시작되게
platform
됩니다.
labor.
그리고 광범위하게 퍼지게 되는데요.
It was widespread in our society from then on.
2021년 7월 1일부터
So from July
정부는
1st
이러한 그 플랫폼 노동자들에 대해서
2021,
4대 보험을 적용할 수 있는
government
방안을 연구하기 시작하긴
started to
합니다.
study
그런데
ways to
문제는 여기에
apply
있었습니다.
for
제가
social
조사를 하면서 인터뷰를
insurances to
해보면
platform workers. But when
고용보험에
I was
가입하기를
interviewing
싫어하십니다.
them,
이유는 간단합니다.
I
자기가
understood that they
신용불량자거든요.
don't want to
고용보험에
actually be
가입하는
a part
순간
of this
자기가 이제
employment
그때부터 채무를
insurance
상환해야 되는 문제에
because they
부딪히게
have
됐다라는 얘기를
bad
하시면서
credit.
고용보험이라는 것을
It meant that
단순하게
as
일괄적으로
soon
다
as they
적용하는 거에 대해서
become
굉장히 반대하시는
beneficiaries of employment
플랫폼 노동자들이 굉장히
insurance, they
많았었습니다.
have
그래서
to start
법
paying off
적용이라는
this
것이
debt. So they
해당자에게
were
과연
hesitant to
어떠한
be
영향을 미치는가에 대해서
beneficiaries.
심도
So
깊은 고려가 없이 진행되고 있었다는 점을 확인할 수
I
있었던
could
그런
find out
연구였습니다.
that the discussion, government's discussion on this law was
자료를
quite
좀 보면서
ungrounded.
하면 좋은데요. 60세에서 65년까지 정년이 보장되는 전일제휴라는 직이나 이런 것들이 아닌 경우 그리고 다른 사람의 사업을 위해서 혹은 다른 사람이
So
받게
we
될
have non-regular
상품,
workers between the
혜택,
age of 60
서비스를
to
위해서
65
플랫폼을 기반으로
or
노무를
people
수행하고
providing labor
해당
on a
사업주권은
platform for
노무
services
수령자로부터
such
일정한
as
대가를
delivery.
받기로 하고 혹은 받는 경우를 플랫폼
And
노동이라고
the
저는
employer provides
일단은
a sort of
정의하고 있습니다. 그런데
compensation
이
under
정의가
a contract.
플랫폼
So
노동에 대한
these are the
정의의
three
전부라고는 생각하지
definitions
않습니다.
of
그래서
platform
이 부분에
workers, but I
대해서도
think this
역시
definition is too narrow. So
합의가 필요한
the
연구가 있어야 되지
definition
않나
is
이렇게
something we
생각합니다.
need to research further.
그리고 특수고용 플랫폼 노동 용어에 대해서도 정부와 일반 학계에서 쓰는 용어가 조금씩 다릅니다.
And
뭐냐면
the terminology
특수 형태
used are very
근로종사자로
different here
부르자라고
between
돼
the
있고요.
government and
그러나 플랫폼
academia.
노동을 하시는
So we
분들은
have the word
노동자로
special type
불러주기를 원하고
workers.
있습니다. 그래서 근로자나 노동자냐를 가지고도 아직까지 합의되지
But the
않은
platform
형태가
workers
되어 있고요.
actually wanted the government to
특수
call them
형태라는 용어가
laborers
근로계획을
instead.
하지 않고 노무를 제공하는 직종을
So special type workers
알아보는다.
are those who provide
부분에
labor without a
조금 더
labor
심도 깊은
contract.
논의가 좀 필요하다고
Some say,
봅니다.
but this is not
연구를
agreed upon. So
진행하면서
we need more
노동자들이
studies on the
어떤
definition as well.
플랫폼이라는 것을 접하는 것에
So
대해서
as I continued with
학계에서
my
말하는
study,
플랫폼과 과연 노동자들이 말하고 있는 플랫폼이
I
같은
came
것인가?
across a
이
question
부분에
whether the
대해서도
term
일정한
platform
합의가
is used in the same
요구된다.
sense between the
라고 볼 수가
academia and the actual workers.
그래서 저는 전라북도
which
특수고용
also
노동자
needs
실태
study.
조사에서
So in the survey that I've
특수고용 노동자라는
mentioned,
용어를 선택했습니다.
I just decided to
특수고용-
use the word
특수형태
special
근로종사자로
employment
하기보다는
platform
특수고용
workers
노동자로
rather
하는
than
것이
the special
적합하다라는
type
판단을
workers.
했습니다. 그래서 오늘 발표문에는 전부 다 특수고용
So you will
노동자라고
see
제가
that
지칭하도록 하겠습니다.
in my thesis that this terminology is used continuously.
자료집 46페이지
Please refer to page 46
다섯 번째 단락을 좀 참고해 주시기
and
바라겠습니다.
paragraph 5 in the Korean version.
여러 학자들이 플랫폼 노동은 기존의 근로종사자와 마찬가지로 종속적 노동을 하고 있으나 명확하게 근로자로서의 법적 지위는 인정받지 못하고 있는 것이 현실입니다. 이에
So although
플랫폼
platform
노동자들
workers are
불합리한
engaged in
현실적인
subordinate
상황을
work,
대변하기 위한
likewise,
다양한 연구가 진행되고
just
있는데요.
like other employees,
이러한
their legal
불안정한
status as
법적
an
지위,
employee is
노동 및
not
사회보장
recognized
정책 방안
definitely.
등을
Therefore, there are various researches such
연구가
as the
지속되고
study on
있습니다.
the
그래서 제가
definition,
결론 부분에서는
type
정책적 제안을
characteristics, size of
전라북도에
platform works,
전주시에 제가
policy
하게
proposals to solve unstable legal status of
됐습니다.
platform workers, their labor and social security. So I was in charge of providing this policy suggestion to Jeonju.
여기서 등장하고 있는 제가 조사했던 그 플랫폼 노동 직종 운영, 학습지 교사, 택배 기사,
So the
대리 기사,
professions that I
퀵
studied
서비스, 자동차
include
판매원, 보험 판매원, 방문 점검원
tutors,
등을 대상으로
delivery,
했으나 실제로 설문조사를
agents,
진행하는 과정에서
and door-to-door insurance sales representatives.
설문이 가능한 그리고 조사가 가능한 업종이
Actually, in the interview,
학습지 교사, 택배 기사,
there was a
대리 기사와 퀵 서비스
limitation
그리고
of people that I could interview
간병인으로
in.
간병 종사,
That
간병
included
노동자로
the
한정을 짓게
private
됐습니다.
tutors,
그
deliveries,
연구에 현실적인
agents,
어려움이 있어서
caretakers.
그렇게 했습니다. 48페이지
Because
보면
of the reality.
분석 개요가 나옵니다. 조사 대상 나와 있고요.
And on page 48, you can see the outline of the
FGI로
study.
총 17차를
We used
진행했어요.
focus group interview,
참여자는 총
17 of
20명.
them,
그래서
and the number of subjects were 20.
인터뷰는 보통 1인당 한 30분
So per
정도씩
person, we had
진행을
around
했습니다.
30-minute interviews.
49페이지를 좀 참고해 주시길 부탁드리겠습니다.
Please refer to page 49.
현재 그 우리나라의 그 플랫폼 노동자 규모를
And this slide
정의하고 있는
shows the
곳이 있는데
size
한국
of platform
고용정보원에서
workers in Korea,
자료에
and
의하면
the statistics is from the Korea
전체
Employment
취업자의
Information Service.
1.7%에서
1.7% to
2.0%에 해당하는 87만 명에서
2.0%,
54만 명으로
which is
추산을
about 470,000 people
경기도의
to
플랫폼 노동자 수는
540,000 people are
13,000명
platform laborers.
정도, 15,000명 정도로 이렇게
And
하고 있는데요.
this is estimated to be around
전라북도의 통계는 아직
130,000 to
정확하게 나와 있지
150,000
않고요.
people
전주시
for
통계도 사실은
Jeonju.
정확하지
But we don't have
않습니다. 그리고
accurate statistics
최근
for Jeonju or
2022년에 플랫폼 노동자의
province.
수는 급감을 하고 있습니다.
However,
그리고
the number of platform
배달을
workers have
했던
been
오토바이로
plunging in
배달했던 많은 분들이
2022,
어떤 일이
especially
벌어졌냐?
the delivery
중고
agents using
오토바이가
motorcycles.
넘쳐나고 있습니다.
So in the market, we have a lot of
그만두었습니다.
used motorcycles
플랫폼
because
노동자들이
they
많이
have
줄고
just
있는 현상이
quit.
현재 벌어지고 있습니다. 지금부터는 그 플랫폼 노동 결과를
Now, this is the
말씀드리겠습니다.
result of our survey.
개인적 특성으로는 이렇게 나오고 있습니다. 여성 응답자는
So there
123명이었고요.
were 123
총 응답자는
female
300명이었습니다.
subjects.
300명 중에
The total number
123명은 여성,
of
남성 응답자는
surveyors were
175명이었습니다.
300. And we had 175 male
분야별로
respondents.
남성과 여성의 비율이 굉장히
So for area,
극단적으로
the proportion
나뉘고
between
있는데요.
women and men
간병
was
노동자와
very different.
학습지 교사의
In the
경우에는
case of
95%
caretakers and
이상이
private
여성이었고요.
tutors, more than
대리운전 퀵서비스
95% were
택배의 경우는
women.
90%
In the case
이상이
of delivery
남성이었습니다.
agents, more than 90% were men.
나이는 40대, 50대,
And
60대
ages
이상이
were
각각 20% 비율로
In the
고르게
40s,
분포되어
50s, and
있는다면
60s, taking count
10세에서
for 20%
19세,
respectively,
청소년이죠.
and
청소년도
those between in their
3.7%를 차지하고
teens
있었습니다.
took account for
대리운전의
37%
경우는
of the
40대에서
total. In the
50대가
case of chauffeur
78%를 차지하고
services,
있었고요.
50s to 60s took account for 40%.
나와 있고 그리고 간병 노동자의 경우는 70%가 60대 이상이었습니다.
And 70%
그러니까
of the
간병 노동자의
caretakers
경우에는
were above the
굉장히
age of 60.
연령이 좀 높은 편에
So you can
속합니다.
see they're quite
학습지 교사의
elderly.
경우에는
In the case of
80%
private
이상이
tutors, more
40대에서
than
50대로
80% were
나타났습니다.
in their
그리고
40s to
아까
50s.
말씀드렸던 청소년 플랫폼 노동자의 경우에는
And in the case
전체가
of
퀵 서비스를
teenagers,
하고 있었습니다.
all of them were engaged in quick
여기서부터
delivery
좀
services.
재밌는 결과들이 나오고 있는데요.
But here I could find some
최종
interesting results.
학력이
Their
고졸자가
educational
172명이었고요.
background, 그다음
172
172 people
졸업,
graduated
대졸자가
from high
57명,
school,
중학교
and
졸업
57
이하도
graduated from
20명의
a four-year
비율을 보였고요.
university,
대학원 이상자도
and there were
1.7%의 비율을 보이고 있었습니다.
1.7% who had graduate degrees,
학습지
master's
교사는
degrees.
전문대 이상이 73%를 차지하고 있었습니다.
73% of the private tutors
그리고
graduated at least from college.
300명의 표본 중에서 혼자벌이
And
그러니까
among 300
혼자만
respondents,
그 수입을 창출하고 있는 비율이 193명이어서 64.3%의
193
비율을
people
보였고요.
were single earners in the household.
맞벌이가 22.7% 66명이었습니다.
And
가족 구성원이 공동 경제 생활이 38명에 불과했고요.
were living in a double income
학습지
family.
교사의 경우만
Only in the case
맞벌이와
of
가족
private
구성원
tutors,
2인 이상, 그러니까 남편 혹은 아내가
more
같이
than
벌고 있는 것이
two people in the
80%
family
이상이었고요.
were earning
나머지
income.
모든 직종, 뭐 퀵 서비스나
But
배달
in
서비스,
the case of
간병
quick delivery
노동자의
service, general
경우에는 혼자벌이
delivery and
비중이
caretakers,
50% 이상을
the
차지하고
share
있었습니다.
of single earners in the household were more than 50%.
그다음에 본인이 하고 있는 플랫폼 노동에 대한 인지 정도를
And we
살펴보는
also looked at the
부분에서는요.
recognition on the platform
본인 상태
work
나오고
that they are
총하고
engaged in. Here you can see the number of people in the household and other indicators here.
플랫폼 노동 자체가 주업이냐 부업이냐를
We also
물어봤습니다.
asked
왜냐하면
whether
다른
the
일을 하고
platform
있는가가
labor
굉장히
were their
중요하기
main
때문에
job or
빅노동의
side
경우에는
job.
잠깐씩 자기가
Because we can see a
하고
lot of
있는 일에서
people engaged in gig work as their side
부업으로서 할 수
jobs.
있는 어떤 그런 형태를 의미하고 있는데 플랫폼 노동을 하고
But
있는
with
당사자들은
platform laborers,
273명, 그러니까
273 of the total
91%가
respondents
주업이라고 답을 했고요. 27명만이
91%
부업이라고 답을 했습니다. 그러니까
said
2020년부터
this
지금
was their main
2022년까지
job.
플랫폼 노동자들의 경우에는
So from 2020 to
플랫폼 노동 자체가
2022,
모든 수입의
platform
전부였다고
labor
볼 수가
provides
있겠습니다.
all of the income they
택배
earn.
노동자의 경우는 100%가 주업이라고 답했고요.
And all
퀵
of
서비스와
the
간병의 경우에도 90%
Career
이상이
service agents
주업이라고
said that this was their
답을 했습니다.
main job, and more than 90% in quick delivery services said that this is their main job.
그리고
Also in the case of caretakers.
조금 더 살펴볼게요. 근무 기간이 어떻게 됐는가를 좀
We also looked
살펴봤었는데요.
at the period
현재
of work.
예, 하고 있는 플랫폼 노동의 10년에서 5년 이상의 경우가
So
73명으로
the share of
24.3%를
people
가져왔는데 이
working for
경우는
this
어느 경우냐면
profession more than
사실은
5 years
대단히
or 10
저도
years
좀 깜짝 놀랐던 게 대리운전이
was
23년째
24%.
지금
I
직종으로서
was surprised
존재한다고
to
합니다. 그래서
learn
대리운전을 하시는
that
분들은
the chauffeur
10년 이상
service
되신 분들이
existed
굉장히
for
많았어요.
more than
그리고 학습지
23% in
교사도 그렇고
Korea.
간병
So
노동자도
a lot of
그렇습니다.
people had more than 10 years experience in chauffeur
퀵서비스의 경우에는
services, private
40% 이상이
tutoring,
1년
and
미만이었습니다.
caretakers.
그거는
And more than
코로나19로 인해서
40%
급격하게
in
증가한
quick service
그러한
delivery
직종으로
agents
분류될 수
said that
있다는
they
의미였습니다.
worked for this profession for less than 1 year. So it means that COVID
현재
had
일을
a
하기
strong
전에
impact.
무슨 일을
We also
했었는가
asked what
좀
previous profession they were
여쭤봤었는데요.
engaged in.
표에는 안 나왔는데
Here we don't have a table.
가장
but
많은 그 32%가 임금 근로자로
32%
근무하고 있었는데
answer that they were
직장에서
regular workers or
자의든 타의든
regular
그만두게
employees
되는 경우가
in
많았다라고 답을
a
해주셨고요.
company, but due to voluntary
경제
or
활동을 하지
non-voluntary
않았던
reasons, they quit.
사람들도
And 22.3% said they were not
예,
engaged
66
previously
년이었는데 이게
in
무슨
economic
말이냐면
activities.
다른 가구원이 소득을
This
창출하기 때문에
means that
자기는
because the partner,
직업을
their
가질
partner
필요가
or
없었는데
spouse were
코로나19가
earning incomes, they didn't have to
되면서부터
work.
소득이
But due to
감소하면서부터 자기도
COVID-19, they had
소득을
to
창출하기
start
위해서 일에
working
뛰어들었다는
because
것을
of the
의미하게 됩니다.
decreasing income level.
직종별로 보면 대리운전 특배의 경우에는
And by
임금
profession,
근로제에서
in the
20한
case of
비율이
chauffeur and
하고요. 간병의 경우에는
delivery,
그러니까 주부로 계시다가
they wanted more
간병 노동자로 일을
income,
하시게 된
so they started
비율이 가장 높았습니다.
engaging in this profession. And in the case of caretakers,
현재 일을
women,
선택한
wives who did not
이유에
work
대한
before started to
설문에서는요.
take this job. As for the reason for
어떤 요인이 플랫폼
choosing
노동을
this
선택하셨는가라는
profession or
질문이었습니다.
platform
이거에
labor,
대해서는 소득을 보충하기 위해서가 가장
the main
많았고요.
reason was
두
to
번째는
increase
플랫폼
income,
노동이 시간을
followed
내가 정할
by
수 있기 때문에
freedom of
이 노동을
time.
선택했다라는 경우가 각각 그러니까 소득을 보충하기 위해서
Percentage-wise,
135명
the
그리고
reasons
시간에
took
구애받지
account
않는
for
소득 창출
28.5%
일감이기 때문에
and
라고
28.1%
답하신 분이
respectively.
133명이었습니다. 그리고 또 한 가지 그 현재 일자리의 계약 기관과 관련해서는
We also looked into
연
the
단위로 1년
contract.
단위지만
So there were
계속해서
annual
계약 갱신을
contracts
해나가고
that is
있는
being
분들은
renewed annually
55.3%에
that took account for
달했습니다. 그러니까 계약서를 작성하긴 하는데 이게
55.3%. So they
근로자
do
계약이 아니고요.
sign a
1년
contract,
단위
but this is not an
사업자
employment
계약인 경우가
contract.
상당히
This
많았고요.
was a one-year business contract,
아직까지도
business to
간병
business
노동자의
contract.
경우에도
Also, in the case
타
of
시도에서는
caretakers
간병
in other
협동조합이
cities
좀
and
만들어져서
provinces, we saw that there
일자리에
were
대한 안정성을
cooperatives
추구하고 있는데 그런
for
부분에서는
caretakers
조금
formed to pursue
전략부가
stability, but this effort was
간병 노동자의
insufficient,
안정적인
especially
일자리
in
창출이
Jeollabuk-do
되고
province.
있는 것으로 조사됐습니다. 그리고 웹사이트 또는 앱을 통한 일감 획득 경험 여부에서
We also
아니오가
asked them
굉장히
whether
많은데요.
they
이게
have
어떤
acquired
의미냐면
jobs on the
실제로 플랫폼
website
노동을 하면서도
or online.
그 팀장이라고 해야
or
되나요?
apps.
아니면 그
And most
뭐라고
of them
할까요?
said no.
그 집단의 어떤 그 리더가 전화 연락을 해서 하게
Usually
됩니다.
they
이게
got
무슨 말이냐면
assignments
간병 노동자의
with a
경우에는
call
60대 이상이
from
굉장히
the
많기
head
때문에
of a
실제로
group or
이분들이
organization,
플랫폼을 통해서 한다기보다는
especially a lot of the people in the
지인 간의 사람 간의
caretaking
연락
profession
체계로 움직이는 경우가
received
상당히 많더라고요.
assignments
그래서
through the
플랫폼
personal
노동이라고
networking, the
부르고는 있으나 실제로는
recommendations or
옛날
referrals
방식의
from other people
일감
rather than
얻는
from
방식이
platforms or apps.
아직도
So
유지되고 있다는 것을 확인할
still
수
we
있습니다.
are using the old
여기서
way.
보면 일감을 얻기 위해 사용하는 앱이라는 거 돼 있는데 이게 어떤 의미냐면
And here
대리운전을
it
하는
says
경우에
apps for
대리운전
getting
전화번호가
assignments. Let's say you're a
전화번호만 해도 100개가
chauffeur.
넘습니다. 그런데
And
그 중에서 여러
in
군데에다가
Jeollabuk-do province, we
자기
have
일을
more than
등록시켜놓고
100 agencies
하는
for chauffeur
앱 또는
services.
프로그램 수를 의미합니다.
So this is the number
그러니까
of
한계가
apps or
굉장히 많은
programs
것은
that
뭐냐면
allow you to register as a
다른
chauffeur
직종,
to one of these
학습지
agencies.
교사나 혹은
Compared to
간병
private
노동자의 경우는
tutors
한
or
개를 가입한다면
caretakers,
대리운전의 경우
where
혹은
they
퀵서비스의 경우는
register
여러 개를
to
가입하는
one
그런
apps
형태로 되어
usually.
있습니다.
For quick service delivery and
업무
chauffeur,
기간,
they
10년
register to
이상 20%로
multiple
나오고 있는
apps.
것은 제가 아까
And I
말씀드렸던
also mentioned
간병
more than
노동자와
20%
그다음에
had
대리운전의
more than 10 years
경우가
experience in
해당되겠습니다.
the case of caretakers and chauffeurs.
수입의 결정 방식에 있어서는요.
And
급여로
we
받는
also
것은
looked in the
24%,
type of income. So
건당 수수료로
24%
받는
received
경우가
wages
60%를 차지하고 있어서
and
건당 수수료 방식으로
60% received
되고 있다는
commissions
사실을
per
확인할 수 있었습니다.
assignment.
현재 근로계약서 작성의 경우는 54%를 보이고 있는데요.
So 54%
우리가
signed
통상적으로 얘기하는
employment
근로계약서라기보다는
contracts. But this contract is not the
일을
typical
하는
contract that we
과정에서의
usually think
책임
of.
문제를
This just a
가르는
document
그러한
specifying the
상호 간의
liability issues. It's just a mutual
합의.
agreement.
방식의 근로계약서라고 보셔야 됩니다. 그래서 일을 하다 다쳤을 경우
Let's say
회사에서는
that
뭐
you're
책임지지
hurt or
않는다라는
injured
것이
during
명시되어
work.
있는
And in
방식의
the document, it
의미의
would say the
근로계약서지
company will
우리가
take
통상적으로
no
얘기하는
liability
회사가
in your
당신을
injury.
고용해서 정기적이고 안정적인
It's not the
복지와
employment
임금을
contract that
보장하겠다라는 그런
specifies
방식의 근로계약서는 약간 다릅니다.
provisions such as the company will hire you to provide regular and stable income and welfare.
계약 기관에서 제공받는 사항 이 부분이 이제 굉장히 중요한데요.
And this is very important.
식대 없습니다,
What
거의.
they receive
교통비
as a
없습니다.
bonus
장려금
from the
없습니다. 퇴직금
hiring
없습니다.
agency, you don't
아예
receive
없습니다가
any money for
85%.
food,
무슨
transportation.
말이냐면
There's also no bonus. So
아무것도 보장해 주지
85%
않는다는
said they received nothing else than the
평균
payment
노동
for their work. So
시간이
nothing is
12시간이 가장
guaranteed for
많은데요.
them. And on
대리운전의
average,
경우에
most of the people
살펴보면
work for
일하는
more than
시간보다
12
대기 시간이 워낙
hours a
길기
day.
때문에
In the case of chauffeurs, they
가장
work
어려운 점을
less
물어봤을
than
때
they wait
한여름과
for
한겨울 얘기를
standby.
합니다. 근데
So the
뭐가
difficulty
문제냐면
lied in the
한여름에는
summer and
그늘로
winter.
찾아서 건물이나 이런 데로 들어가고
For
싶어도
example, in summer it's really
허용하지
hot and
않습니다.
they want to
대리 기사들이
wait
가서
inside
쉴
a
수가
building,
없습니다.
but they are
한겨울에도
not allowed to
마찬가지입니다.
do that. Also in
화장실을
winter,
찾기가 어렵습니다.
it's hard for them to find restrooms
전주시에서는
during work. And in
작년에
Jeonju last year,
대리운전 기사와 퀵서비스
for
기사를 위한
shoppers
쉼터를
and delivery
신도시에
agents,
마련했습니다.
the city
하지만
established
하나입니다.
a shelter for them in the new town, but there's only one in the entire
노동일수는
city.
6일이
And
54%로 가장 많습니다.
54% said they work for
5일이
6 days
30%
a
정도
week
차지하고 있습니다.
and 30% 5 days a week.
대리운전의
In the
경우하고
case
간병
of
노동자의 경우에는
chauffeurs
사실
and
7일 근무제,
caretakers,
7일
they
하는 경우도 상당히
actually,
많습니다.
in many cases, worked 7 days.
여러 가지 설문이 있는데요.
So
마지막
there are a
결론
lot of
부분에서
questions,
제가
but let me move on to my conclusion
제안하고 있는 부분을 마지막으로 말씀드리고
as a
끝내도록
policy
하겠습니다.
suggestion before I conclude.
52페이지
Please
마지막
refer to
첫째,
page
둘째,
52
셋째인데요.
in the Korean version.
플랫폼 노동에 대해서 지방자치단체는
So in local
조례로서
municipalities,
확실한 지원을
ordinances
좀
must be
보장을
established to
했으면 하는
guarantee support to these
바람을 가지고
platform
있고요.
workers.
4대 보험 지원 계획에
Secondly,
있어서는 플랫폼 노동자의
governments
의견을
need to
받아서
improve the
그들에게 적합한
institution to
방식으로
support
시행을
them with
해줬으면
social
하는
insurance,
바람이 있고요.
of course by listening
세
to their
번째는
needs.
플랫폼 노동에
And
대한
third,
연구와
we need
지속적인 지원을 위한
An organization that continues
연구기관 혹은
research and
지원기관의
support on
설립이 꼭
platform
필요하다고
laborers.
생각을 하고 있습니다. 이러한 방식으로
In this
플랫폼
way,
노동자의 안정적인
We will be
직업생활이
able to
가능할 수
secure
있도록
the
해주는 바람을
stability in their jobs
말씀드리면서
for platform
전주시
workers.
플랫폼 노동자
And
실태조사
with this, I would like
연구
to
내용을
conclude my presentation.
말씀드렸습니다.
Thank
감사합니다.
you very much for listening.
네, 박광철 교수님께서
Thank you, Professor Park.
이 전주시
He explained
플랫폼 노동의 실태에
The
대해서
survey
조사하신
on
것을
Jeonju's
하셨는데,
platform workers.
들으신 바대로
So as we have heard,
택배 퀵 서비스
courier and quick delivery service, caretaker,
다양한 분야에
private tutor
조사를 하셨는데
were the respondents
엄밀한
of the
의미의
survey.
그 디지털 플랫폼을 이용해서 이 노동이니까
So
이
using
노무
digital
서비스를
platform to
제공하는 그런
provide labor,
그 종사자도 있고 또 직업 알선 업체를
were the
통해서
description of some of
노무
these
서비스를
workers.
제공하는 그 특수고용
And we
형태라
also
그래서
saw the case of special employment type workers
이게 같이 조사가
who
된
were
것으로
gain assignments
이해를
from
해주시면
agents.
좋을 것 같습니다.
So you could here understand the scope of the
다음은
respondents.
우리 그 첫 번째 그 발표자였던
Next,
그 네이튼 슈나이더
we will invite the Professor Nathan Schneider again so that we can hear from him. So, Professor Nathan, please go ahead. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Sure, I deserve. I'm very sorry. My computer crashed somehow. Hopefully that won't happen again. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you to my co-panelists for bearing with me and being flexible. Okay. What I want to share with you as reflections on my years of work accompanying cooperatives forming in the digital economy, attempting to bring shared ownership as a strategy and a tool for justice in the gig economy, in the data economy, and beyond. And in the years that I've been doing this, both in the United States here and in some other parts of the world as well, it's often been very frustrating work. Often people who are incredibly talented are having a harder time than they should, while people with less talent, with less ethical grounding, end up getting lavishly funded by the existing economy and the existing tech startup ecosystem. And so I want to share a bit about where I've come out of this experience in terms of what we need and how we need to recognize, first of all, the limitations of how cooperative policy and financial policy generally has developed, and to target interventions and target a policy strategy that is really ambitious enough to make shared ownership far more available than it is today. What would it take for cooperatives and other forms of shared ownership to be, for instance, at least half of the private sector economy? You know, that's the goal that I'm naively targeting. To get there, I'm going to share some stories that many of which come out of the United States and our experience here. I just want to acknowledge that. I am learning a lot about the Korean context. I look forward to learning more, and I apologize for my ignorance of your context so far. But I hope that the experience from our context here will be helpful for you. First assumption is that tech policy is not separate from other policy. Too often we've treated as separate, said, oh, people can only regulate tech if they're, you know, some kind of tech wizard. No, I think actually a lot of the same principles, the same ethics apply in tech and in other areas of economic life as well. The second is that accountability lacking in tech has in some contexts been achieved in other sectors. And historically, the problems we're facing right now with the tech economy that feel very new, that feel kind of strange because it's new technology involved, actually have been solved in other places. They have been addressed, and that there are a lot of lessons that we can draw from that experience. So that's good news. So finally, the goal here is, rather than simply building tech-specific policy or thinking about like platform cooperatives, for instance, cooperatives on online platforms as being a totally different kind of thing than anything we've seen before, instead to recognize that actually what we need to do is far more widely generalize access to accountability in how we finance and develop and enable businesses. I'm going to talk first a bit about where we are. We find ourselves in an accountability crisis. That's how I think of the overarching crisis of the tech economy, both in the context of labor and of personal data and relationships and surveillance. These come down. These are problems not because data about people exists or because there are gig platforms out there. The problem, as I understand it, is accountability. is that these platforms are not accountable to the right people. And as a result, we see abuses happen over and over again and again. Second, that this is very importantly a failure of governance and oversight. And that isn't just, governance meaning government. But actually the fact that we don't really have the right kinds of jurisdictions to govern the online economy. The online economy, in some respects, is territorial, in some respects, is country specific, but in many respects, is global, or is regional, or is specific to a language group that may cross many countries. And we don't really have the jurisdictions that I think we need yet to govern what is really emerging in our economic and social and technological lives. Further, I've seen again and again that co-ops are just not able to keep up. I say this as the founder of a co-founder of an accelerator, Start.coop, for co-ops, largely in the tech economy. I have tried to do all I can to support co-ops growing and developing and finding markets and success in the online economy. Sometimes they do. This picture is from Stocksy United, a successful platform co-op in the in stock photography and video. But even a success story like Startup or like Stocksy is not really competing head to head at the scale of venture-backed competitors. Venture or co-op capital, the ability for shared ownership and cooperatives to access capital just cannot compete with the scale of what venture capital is able to enable right now under the current system as we experience it. Really important to remember, of course, that venture capital is not a natural law. It was enabled by certain, in our context, government policies, and many of those policies are replicated elsewhere around the world. Also, membership, which is what cooperatives and shared ownership is all about, is a lot harder to scale under current rules than users. A user can start using a platform with a couple of clicks. Membership involves a more complex legal arrangement. And that helps prevent shared ownership from being a more meaningful part of our online economy. Now, again, as I said before, there's some good news. We've done this before. And this is something I want to, again, where I'm going into a US specific history. But what I find when I talk with others around the world about these kinds of stories is that there are comparable histories in many countries. This is a list of major policies that have enabled the cooperative sector in the United States. The Capper-Volstead Act, for instance, gave cooperatives an exemption to antitrust law, but actually only agricultural cooperatives, because at that time it was the agricultural cooperatives, the farmers, who had real power. And so they created a carve out for themselves. Similarly, the Farm Credit Act, which was part of a longer set of policy of laws over the early decades of the 20th century, that established a financing structure for agricultural cooperatives. As a result, there's a $130 billion cooperative bank down the road from me. It's called CoBank, but it can only be used by agricultural cooperatives. The Federal Credit Union Act established the structure of credit unions, cooperative banks, spread all across the country, building on the Canadian model. But in each case, they had to follow a very specific rubric of what a credit union is. Again, it's a law very bounded. Enabled shared ownership of financial institutions, but only of one very specific kind. the Rural Electrification Act in 1936, one of the most powerful economic development strategies in U.S. history. You know, my grandfather was born on a farm in Colorado, where I live now, that had no electricity. That farm only got electricity because the federal government enabled the financing of rural communities to build cooperatives to bring themselves electricity. This brought rural electrification from, you know, something like 10% to 90% within about a decade. Incredibly powerful and successful development program, and yet constrained again to a very specific model. A rural electric co-op has to look a certain way. It doesn't help people who are trying to build solar farms today because their models are going to look different. So it was very constrained and very successful. And then finally, this is not cooperative specifically, but the employee stock ownership plan was enabled through law in an adjustment to the pension system in 1974. This unleashed worker ownership as a strategy, as an option for businesses. And today around 14 million Americans are co-owners of their businesses through this model, which is a far larger number than the few thousand who are members of worker cooperatives. So a very powerful program, but very constrained again, contained within the pension system, and really not able to spread to a lot of sectors, you know, just based on the particular dynamics of that implementation. So a few limitations I want to point out here. One thing is that, you know, many of these are part of you know, a racist system implemented in the New Deal period in the 1930s. And so many Americans of color, non-white Americans, did not benefit equally from these. In some cases, you know, they did benefit, but it's important to recognize that these opportunities were not made available equally, as was the case with many social programs at that time and today. Second is the fact that investor ownership policy, you know, I'm talking here about things like the stock market. The general assumption of the of economic policy is that investors can invest in whatever they want. The laws that they have that apply to their behavior generally aren't specific around any particular business model or any industry. You know, the stock market doesn't care what industry you're in. You can still go public on the stock market. However, when we design cooperative laws, we generally box people into a specific model. You know, there are different incorporation statutes and, you know, federal governance for agricultural cooperatives compared to credit unions, compared to worker cooperatives. They're all separate. And at the rare moments when we have enabled financing for some of these, it has been for a very specific model. And what I argue is that as much as past cooperative policy has enabled cooperatives, it's also put cooperatives in a straitjacket and prevented cooperatives from actually being able to spread and particularly actually being able to be creative. And when you look at the historical documents of during the periods when these developments were occurring in the United States, but you see this in other places as well, this was intentional. This was the point. Investors were very concerned that cooperatives would compete with them. So they helped ensure that any laws supporting cooperative development would be constrained to the areas of the markets that the investors didn't actually want, like financial services to poor people, electrification in rural areas where the margins are very low, these sorts of things. They tolerated cooperatives only where they didn't actually want them. And so it leaves us with the question, what if we unleashed opportunities for economic democracy for everyone and everything? What if we simply allowed economic democracy the same kinds of access to financing, to sensible incorporation, to economic infrastructure that investors already have? And let's make sure to recognize that when we see cooperatives and similar businesses not being well represented in our economies, that's by design. Too often, I think we blame the cooperative founders for things that actually aren't their fault. We treat it as a kind of character flaw, when in fact, it's a policy flaw. Oops. Next, I turn to strategy, the vectors. How could we achieve this? One place to start is in incorporation. How businesses are able to form legally. What kinds of businesses can form? What is allowed to form? In many cases, you see incorporation structures being limited again to particular industries or particular business types. So often there's a totally different legal structure for housing cooperatives as opposed to farming cooperatives or for financial industry cooperatives. Why should that be the case? Why do these need to be so separate? Investor-owned businesses can use the same legal statute regardless of the industry they're in. I remember once seeing a slide from Japan, and it was something like several dozen different kinds of incorporation, depending on the industry that a cooperative was in. This is a real limitation. It's a real hindrance, because it means, first of all, that none of those statutes are well developed, well maintained, well supported in legal jurisprudence. And also that all of those cooperatives are isolated from each other. They don't have shared interests. They can't form a political bloc. There are other ways of doing this. Here in Colorado, where I live, we have a structure called a limited cooperative association. It was created by our farmers, but it wasn't created just for farmers. They just said anybody can use this structure to create any kind of cooperative they like. They can even have multiple stakeholder classes. And that statute now is the primary statute used by tech cooperatives around the country. They're incorporating here in Colorado with that statute that the farmers designed. The farmers probably did not know that tech platforms would start using the thing they created, but their wisdom was in creating a statute designed for creativity, not for constraint. We also need incorporation statutes that are capable of accommodating transnational membership, making membership as easy as people becoming a user, so that people can really share the value they're helping to create. Second, and in some ways the crux of this whole strategy, is around financing, because financing is what I see over and over again as the constraint, that cooperatives just are not able to access capital at a level that other kinds of businesses are. And this is not because cooperatives are incapable of handling capital responsibly. Again, there's a massive cooperative bank down the road from me that lends out huge amounts of money to cooperatives around the country in the agricultural sector. Once I was at a meeting in Italy where one of the leading scholars and cooperatives in that country said, well, of course, cooperatives will never be able to own nuclear power plants. Well, in the United States, we have cooperatives that own nuclear power plants because they're rural electric cooperatives and there is a financing framework for them. We need to enable that kind of financing framework for any kind of shared ownership business so that they can compete meaningfully with investor ownership. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from a man also from Colorado named Louis Kelso, who's the inventor of that employee stock ownership plan that became law in 1974 that I mentioned earlier. He also developed strategies for how to finance shared ownership generally, proposed a federal program that would be an insurance pool that would support banks in making investments in shared ownership. We have something very similar for our housing market and for some other sectors of the economy. So there are good precedents for this sort of thing. Something that would just help make the business make sense for the financial industry and bring shared ownership into the mainstream. Another approach is the Capital for Cooperatives Act, proposed in 2021. It has not passed, but actually also comes out of Colorado here. But it's a federal proposal to simply enable our small business financing arm, the Small Business Administration, to lend to any kind of cooperative. Currently, that federal body, the Small Business Administration, does not know how to lend to cooperatives. It doesn't have a framework. This law says, well, you have to figure out a framework. And it's simple but radical, because this is actually the first bill, if it were to pass into law, that I know of in the history of federal cooperatives, at least the financing of cooperatives, that actually doesn't discriminate based on the industry or the type of business. So it's simple, but actually deceptively radical. This is not what has historically been done, but it's what we need. We need frameworks that think of shared ownership as a creative space, as something that people will be inventing and reinventing. Finally, if we have these two, if we have these broad incorporation frameworks and these broad financial frameworks, it enables much more coordination among businesses in the cooperative sectors. Right now, what we experience because of the history I've tried to tell you, we have a situation where the lobbies in Washington for rural electric cooperatives, for credit unions, for agricultural cooperatives are each actually much larger than the lobby for cooperatives in general, because those businesses have much more interest in just supporting their own agenda, their own sector, than they have in supporting the broader sector. And as a result, their political might, which is quite considerable, does not support new and emerging tech cooperatives in any way. And so if we were all sharing a single framework for incorporation and financing, there would be much more incentive for broader cooperation. You know, what the people in the cooperative movement call Principle 6, the sixth principle of cooperatives, which is cooperation among cooperatives. Something that is often spoken about but rarely done. I think in large part because of how our policies have been designed. We also see opportunities for deeper kinds of cooperative associations, even without law. In Italy, for instance, which is a place that does have a broad cooperative framework, they also have broad cooperative associations that use tools like indivisible reserves to ensure that the wealth created in the cooperative sector is reinvested in developing new cooperatives. So there are tools that sectors can develop to facilitate coordination, but it's hard when everybody is operating in a different policy structure, trying to lobby a different part of government, and is actually prevented from being creative beyond the imagination of what people were thinking of in, say, the 1930s. So, you know, the more you look at this sector, the more you recognize it's constrained. It's been prevented from accessing reasonable incorporation. It's been prevented from accessing reasonable financing. And the sum result of that is that the sector, the cooperative movement, and shared ownership generally have been prevented from coordinating together and forming a cohesive political bloc, which they otherwise could have and could help ensure that shared ownership has a seat at the table in important policy decisions. So how can we go about achieving some of the aims that I've proposed here? One is to follow the lead of those Colorado farmers I mentioned when they created the limited cooperative association statute. They could have said, we're just creating a statute for ourselves, for farmers. But instead, they created one that didn't say anything about farmers, that said, you can use this with whatever kind of cooperative you like. So as we're developing policy strategies, think like this. Try to develop, to build not just for you, not just for what you're trying to address, not just for the gig economy or for whatever is front of mind right now, but rather for the future. Build broad frameworks that invite creativity of future generations, that recognize shared ownership as a creative tool, not as a fixed model. Third, I think it's really important to recognize that we can't just enable cooperatives. We also have to prevent some of the behavior that you see among investor-owned firms that enables unfair competition, that prevents cooperatives from taking the high road. I'll give you an example here. In the town where I live, in Boulder, we had a co-op take off during the lockdowns of the pandemic. It's called Nosh. It was owned, still exists in a neighboring town. It's owned by the restaurants that use it. It's a delivery platform for delivering food, very needed during the pandemic. The city loved this. It actually supported it. The restaurants really loved it because it was fair to them and they owned it. And it wasn't, unlike companies like Uber and Seamless and other investor-backed platforms, it wasn't exploiting them. And so it really worked well for them. And they had the capital to finance it. The trouble is, of course, that they're restaurants. Their margins are thin. They didn't have that much capital. And what ended up happening was after the lockdown passed, the investor-owned companies decided we're not going to cede this market to anybody. And using their untold wealth from investor ownership, they were able to undercut this local restaurant-owned ethical platform. In another case, in Austin, Texas, Uber and Lyft refused to fingerprint drivers, which is what is expected of taxi drivers. By breaking the law, they were developing a business model. When the city required them to fingerprint drivers, they actually just left until the state stepped in and overrode the city. In the meantime, a cooperative sprung up and a nonprofit rideshare company, enabling a locally run rideshare system. It's possible, but it required the state to step in and force these companies to follow the law. So an important part of enabling a fairer economy, one that involves more shared ownership, is, I think, at some point, really reining in the excesses that we have permitted and tolerated in so many contexts among investor-owned businesses. And that becomes easier when there are real cooperative and shared ownership alternatives. We've got to recognize, that it comes from both sides. We have to enable, but we also have to challenge and prevent. So the basis of this talk is a paper that you can read at the link displayed here, as published in a Oxford University Press book a year or two ago. And so you can, if you're interested, look into these proposals in more detail. I'm working right now with the Donut Economics Action Lab in the UK to develop a policy framework for policymakers around the world. who are interested in this kind of ambitious strategy. But I just want to leave you with that challenge, to be ambitious, to not assume that the problem is a small one, that the challenge is a matter of just a little more technical support here, a little more encouragement there, but actually that they're in some pretty fundamental ways, our economic systems are tilted against shared ownership. And that if we really want to solve that deep accountability crisis of the online economy, we have to take those problems on head on. Thank you so much. And thank you for your patience with me.
네,
Thank you, Professor Schneider, for that wonderful presentation. So, Professor Schneider's presentation was very beneficial, and I understood it as saying that there are a lot of problems in the platform economy, and as one solution, we see the rise of cooperatives, but we don't really see it being spread or growing rapidly as we expect. And we have traditional forms of cooperatives in Korea, like agricultural cooperatives or worker cooperatives that are pursuing the interest of single groups. So, in the case of platform cooperatives, we need community ownership. So it means we need a multilateral cooperative and a suitable financial support system, which raises the need for a new legal system, a new financial system. And he also mentioned creative community ownership. I think that's why we need creativity. We need a lot of new things to support this. So he helped us understand the situation in the US, and now we will turn our eyes to Korea by listening to Ms. Kim Eun-kyung, researcher of Gyeonggi Research Institute. It will also be about cooperatives in a wider perspective, and we will also be able to listen to policy suggestions for Korea. Please welcome her with a round of applause.
Hello everyone, I'm Eun-kyung Kim from the Gyeonggi Research Institute. I majored in the economics, so I studied the digital transformation and the digital technology, but I had a project for the Gyeonggi Province Platform Cooperative, and one of them was that how can we organize this vulnerable platform workers by making the platform cooperatives? Like Professor Schneider and Schwartz, I also look at those area. So we have so many experts here, but the cooperatives itself is a very difficult to build. But still, it is doubt to make a platform cooperatives in the era of the digitalizations. So I study about this, and we also have the decree about it, and we have the support for the insurance for the platform workers, and the National Assembly has a discussion about this. But COVID-19 still the discussion was decreasing. So when I worked for these cooperatives, I met a lot of people who are working for the cooperatives. But as the professor said, it is very frustrating for the people who work for the cooperatives. So let me briefly tell you my work. One of my work I've done in April 2020. Now I'm studying the monopolization of the platform companies for the fair platform ecosystem. So maybe the platform cooperatives and the platform workers are the part of these regulation. I met the Pemin and Kakao and Uber to have a discussion after the COVID-19. So these platform companies significantly grew, and also not only platform delivery but also the platform shopping increased during the lockdown, and we see the several side effects. As Professor Schneider said, the platform co-op means the digital platform plus co-ops. So we call it the COOPs. So based on the digital platform, we talk about the cooperatives concept. So the ownership and the membership is working inside the platform cooperatives. So how the platform cooperatives can be the solution for the platform workers? Because they are using the mobile device. That's why it is easier to make the platform cooperatives for the platform workers. However, the platform workers are very free in terms of this kind of membership. So they do not want to get the membership for the corporate. That's another problem for the platform workers. So maybe we can develop this as the social organization. So this is 10 principles of the cooperatives according to the Professor Schultz. So they did this as the movement in New York, but in Korea called this as the alternative social model. So we can see this on the slide as the platform example. So just right before the COVID-19, I went to Italy and the UK. I met the Coop UK to talk about the trainings of the cooperatives. And also I went to the Italy to have a Airbnb and the Coop together, Kotabo. And the Kotabo is for the taxi drivers. So we have many proxy drivers, but it is very difficult for the Korea because we have a different organization for the taxi company and individual drivers. But in Italy, all the taxi drivers are owned by themselves. They have the cooperatives, and the Bologna have three taxi cooperatives. And the Airbnb case was very impressive because the young generation, fresh out of the school, made a startup. But the form of the organization was a cooperatives. And they were funded by Legacook, which is the Bologna local cooperatives. So I'm not sure maybe the NH can do this in Korea or not, but the Scoop provided the funding for these Airbnb, and they try to make their company and the cooperatives just like the Airbnb. They are based in the Bologna, and their office is located in the a startup complex. So all the other companies there are startups, they are the cooperatives. Though this Airbnb was established by the young generation in their 20s, and they wanted to build a business model for the local citizens who do not want to make their town as a tourist destination. So the cooperatives was a resistance to the digital technology, but I believe that the cooperatives is not the resistance to the big tech companies, platform companies. So you can make the cooperatives, but it is not, because it cannot be the alternative to the big companies or big techs. So maybe we can weaken the power of them, or we can have more activities based on the community. That's why we have to go forward. So we have so many side effects due to the resulted from the digital monopolies, and now we have the decreasing of the local economy and the killing the ecosystem in the local area. And also the consumers' purchasing power is going weaker if the monopolies comes in. So we feel comfortable using the Google right now, but we have end up to having the difficult problems like identity theft or the information theft. So it also make the labor market weaker too. So as an alternative for that, we can make the platform co-op. But I don't see this can replace the market, but they can check and balance the big techs. I think this is especially important for the local economy. So we need the cooperatives, but their working environment is so difficult. They do not understand the bylaws for the cooperatives, and they have a lot of issues, and they have uncertainty, and they do not understand the principles of the cooperatives, or the size is so small. So as the Professor Schneider said, the financing is very important to scale up, and also they are not democratic, which should be or the supposed to be the most democratic, but they are not actually. And establishments are supported, and we do not have enough subsidies. Those are the problem. And now we have no funding systems. So social financing is not active yet, and finance in Korea is very capitalized. So this kind of part is not working well. So we need an improvement here. So problem is that not whether this is cooperatives or not, but even if the conventional cooperatives do not solve this kind of problem, we cannot have any further the new growth of the cooperatives. So we need the local management system because the local area do not have enough data. And also that we need to provide the training for the principles of the democracy and the cooperatives. Especially important thing is that they should not focus on the now it should focus on the growth-based policy support. But it cannot be done only with the financing. So we need a new way of thinking, new way of the practices, just like the community shares in the UK. So simply put, we have so many policy suggestions, but I will let you know just part of them. So the social economy is also one of the ecosystem. So each institution should receive the policy support, and we need the cooperation from the national agencies and the local agency, so that we can look at this problem together with the local economic growth. Now we are in the era of the platform, so we need to make the kit. I suggest this a lot because the cooperatives need this, and the social economic model needs us. So by making this kind of model, we have to give an easy access to people. And we also need a training program. When I met the people in the cooperatives, they do not have a sufficient training. When I met them in the UK, they gave us their cases to me. So we need to have an accelerator program or the digital skill training, because digitalization in the cooperatives is very important to transform into the platform cooperatives. So they have to understand the governance of the COOPs itself. So they have so many issues in their accounting and the understanding of the principles. So we need to provide digital education. So I also try to put the establishment of the cooperatives in the startup program, because young generations are familiar to the platform. So we need to provide a way that the young generation can access to these platform cooperatives. In Korea, we use the national budget to make this kind of thing, but it doesn't help. It kills the creativity of the private sector. So I'd like to say that the private sector cooperation is highly required. So maybe the public sector can do the open source kits, and they have their own jobs to do, but the private sector should do their own part too, so that they have to make this customers join into the COOPs. And in the US, they have the platform programmer, and the cooperatives are helping that. We also have such kind of developers because Seongnam is famous for the IT technology. So we are thinking on cooperating with the Seongnam city right now. So all these things cannot be done by the public agencies. So we need to have the various business models so that we can grow the private sector for this. Every organization have the subsidy or the support agency. Last year, I worked with the Justice Party to identify the public platform. So the public platform is a civic-led platform. But this is not only for the civil organization, because local finance is important so that we can receive the semi fundings or the credit union or the saving banks. So these local-based financial institutions join these platforms. So all the social entities like a public agency and citizens and all other entities can make or should make the common platform. So whether they participate or whether come from the outside, so this kind of model I believe is needed in the future. Of course, we need a support from the central government or the local governments. Once they have a power, they can receive the money from the government. But in the beginnings, it bounds to have the support from the various agencies. So I gave you the several suggestions, and the corporate itself is difficult. So how difficult will be for the platform cooperatives? So I'd like to find the more efficient and the right model for the young generation. So I'd like to suggest you to consider this model for your local area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for that great presentation. So it was also about platform cooperatives. And it was about creating a separate playground for companies, different from the ones dominated by big tech. So she also mentioned the importance of the government playing a role in creating an ecosystem to enable this. Now that we have listened to the presentations, it's time to move on to our discussion. I now invite all the panelists and the presenters here to the stage, and we have about 20 minutes left. We will first listen to the discussions by our panelists for about 15 minutes in total and use the remaining time for comments that could arise from our presenters. Without further ado, let me invite Ms. Jung Soo-kyung, the head of Urban Base Camp, as our first panelist. Good afternoon. My name is Jung Soo-kyung, and I am the CEO of Urban Basecamp. It's a pleasure to meet with you. So rather than on platform cooperatives, I would like to talk about the role of platforms in the local city. Our presenters have raised the need for platforms for platform workers, but I'm going to talk about making platforms for local communities rather. Let me take my company as an example. As explained, Urban Basecamp is a foundation. So we deal with urban issues, and we also have as members freelancers who are interested in this area to discuss these social issues. We're not a cooperative, but we do have self-employed people who are the members. They all have their main jobs, but come here to discuss the social issues and work together under the name Urban Basecamp. So we carry out large-scale research and programs. So we're not a cooperative, but as Dr. Kim has mentioned, we do see startups being operated under the framework of a cooperative. So I think we are similar to that form. So we were all working in very adverse conditions and lacking income. We couldn't work by alone anymore, so we decided to form a team. And one day we met with an entrepreneur in their 20s and in a cafe. So we understood that we are having these meetings in cafes and we are paying a lot for coffee. So we thought, why not instead make a space for us? So at that time, we were only 4 members, but we are continuously growing. Now we have more than 7 members, but still our self-employed companies remained very weak and small. So we decided to grow as a corporation. We decided to build a corporation. So we were able to engage in larger scale researches as a nonprofit organization, and we continued to introduce our company under this corporation. So we were able to settle down further and grow as a company. Now we have more income to be able to engage in other activities as well. Our next goal is to digitize ourselves. The size of our space is limited, so it's hard for our partners to come into this space. So we want to digitalize ourselves to create a network so that we can help other self-employed people or SMEs to grow further and grow as the members in the local community. But this is an idea, and we have not embarked on this for 2 years because it seems digital transformation is much difficult than we expected. So in this regard, we decided to build a community. Before digital transformation, we want to build a community to understand whether our members are looking toward the same direction, are able to cooperate and participate in the discussion under the same vision. So we are making call outs to build an inner circle and expand our corporation to have more members. Now, many say, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just come up with a digital transformation platform and invite others? But we are hesitant because of 3 factors. First of all, big tech have capital, and a lot of people will be using their platform, but we're very small. So just because we build a platform, we are not guaranteed with the success. So there are 3 elements to think about. So we started out as an offline corporation. So before we digitize ourselves, we need to have a very clear local community physically, and then we will be able to move into the online stage. And secondly, we need technology and funds. Many say this, we all have our main jobs. So to be able to operate this platform, we need manpower. So that's another issue. And thirdly, there's the consumer issue. Just because we build a website doesn't mean it's going to succeed and we'll have traffic flowing in. So we are thinking about this issue. Other than us, there are many entities building a website and trying to build a web platform to enable cooperation. But we see a lot of them failing. So we are first going to make a lot of consideration on these three issues before we move toward DX. And we are learning from these failure cases. So under the circumstances, the Jeonju city government built a food-related platform, the food taste delivery platform it's called. They put in a lot of funds, but they couldn't appeal to the consumers. It's run by the city. So they're just appealing to the consumers, asking the consumers to use this, but the delivery fee is similar to the commercial platforms. So from the perspective of consumers, they don't have any reason to use the Jeonju City platform because there are so many other commercial apps out there. So Jeonju has a lot of limitation in marketing. But as a member of the Jeonju local community, I think it's better not for the public to build a platform. The government should just support the private sector who wants to build a platform. I think that's the better way. As Dr. Kim has mentioned, we have various options, various issues, but first we need the most technical support. We don't have any knowledge in coding or development, and the budget is continuously needed, not just for building the platform, but for operating it as well. So we need support to nurture the talents needed rather than the government making its own platform. That's the better way. And we have crowdfunding, other sources of financing, and the public should also be promoting or providing information on these financing methods to the private sector. And we're working in the urban space where we have a lot of interest in local creators or the local community. But unfortunately, they want to build their own platform and receive funds from the government to build their own platform. But I think it's better to create an ecosystem and cooperate with the public. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful discussion. So Ms. Chung is running the platform actually right now. So she has a fluent experience for the running a platform. So if the Jeonju City attempt to have the platform cooperative, then maybe she can advise a lot of ideas. Next, Moon Kyung-ha, the professor of the Jeonju University, have the discussion. So as a scholar, I became to have an interest in the platform cooperatives after listening to the best practice in other countries of SMART. Because this platform cooperatives is the solution for the platform labor issue, but incorporation is very difficult. So I'd like to have a the wider perspective. Now that we see the platformization is going on across the industry, and the excessive profit pursuing and poor working environment is very problematic. However, in the UN, OECD, and the big corporation, benefit corporation, and also the B Lab and the guidelines of the GRI collectively launched the impact management platform. So the term platform has a very wide spectrum, I can say. So responding to this platform and the digitalization, the credit union also established the fintech platform for the like accounting and taxation and the payment, and also the Ministry of SME and the startups promoting the online businesses of the mom and pops and try to find the sales channel. So the platform cooperatives can be the new business models in the context of the social economy. However, this information was shared, and some try to make the cooperatives, but all the cases were suspended right now. But the Jeonju city had the survey about this, and there was some like supportive measures for that. And now they established also the new policy department for the platform cooperatives. So I look at the Jeonju city's effort, and the Jeonju need to have the cautious approach with a lot of time. Because before establishing the policy, they could not know the size of the platform workers, and industry is so various, so they could not come up with the specific measures for each area. And according to the result of the survey, we could see that the law, application of law is not possible, but all the income from the platform working was satisfactory according to the participants, and they were also satisfied and positive about the sustainability of their job, which was unexpected. And also they said the room to maneuver in times of the time and the space for them, and they also think positively about working on the platform, and they also feel good at doing this as a side job. So depending on their jobs, I could see some positive response from the respondents. So I had a lot of food for thoughts after this. But how this labor management is done in other cooperatives, and I could see that I could see some social cooperatives have the labor management based on the principles of the platform cooperatives. However, those goals were just idea, and it is difficult to reflect them into the reality. So using this opportunity, I'd like to suggest that to make the organization, build the organization like a smart among the artists in this Jeonju area, because Jeonju is a city of culture and arts. And also like a Airbnb, I hope that we can have those kind of application in Jeonju. But to do so, we need to have an information disclosure, like a transparent management, because those information should be shared with the public. And secondly, the Jeonju and local communities has a lot of things to support. Also, Professor Schneider said all these platform cooperatives as the movement. So the regulation is getting stronger for the cooperatives, and digital technology and the regulations are the issue in terms of the platform cooperatives, and it is also same condition in Korea right now, but at the level of local city, I think we can have more room to maneuver, we believe. So we will face the crisis of the platform cooperatives, platform companies, and the job creation. So I hope that we need to have the platform for the communication to talk about the sustainability. By doing so, maybe we can have the more capability for the innovation and other technologies. So the Jeonju city is providing a lot of support, but we hope that we have more various the labor types in the digital platform. And I also hope that we will have a job creation through the digital platform. And catering to the higher standards of the consumers, I also like to ask the mom and pops management to have a more efficient effort to satisfy their customers. And I also ask for the transparency of the management. And thirdly, I'd like to suggest the platform of the management who pursue the public value. So mainly, the object will be the B Corp or the benefit corporation. So all the management, including the startups, they can do this. Maybe it can be the B Corp, the certified companies in the Jeonju. So maybe it can be the preliminary step for the B Corp authorization. So now some the Jeonju City SME departments give some certificate of this kind of company as the Pai Jeonju company. So we also have a designation for the restaurants who is friendly to the handicapped people. But if once I visited there in person, the situation was a little different from my expectation. So, we can see some report about the inefficiency of those kind of situation, and those restaurants can be removed from the platform. And if they also have the transfer management, maybe we can have a more the information transparency and sincerity. So the administrative department and also the citizens can go out of box. Then they can find much more things to do, even though that is not the public platform to work against the platform tech companies.
Thank you very much. I think I'm a bad moderator because it's already 12:30. We were supposed to end at 12:25, but you shared a lot of insights, so I think we are delayed. So we will use the last several minutes. I wanted to use the last several minutes to listen to comments from our presenters, but I apologize for not being able to do that. So let me just wrap up this session. Samuel Bowles, the well-known economist, recently wrote in his paper that capitalism now is shrinking rapidly. He used the term shrinking capitalism. So in capitalism, the key is capital, of course, but we see the rise of Uber, Airbnb, and these companies saying that I'm not an employer. I don't employ people. So they are capitalists, not an employer. So under this pretext, they are exploiting capitalism. And we see a lot of freelancers who are not the typical workers that we think of. So due to these two reasons, we need an alternative to capitalism, and we're moving toward that. I think one alternative is what was mentioned by Professor Hodge. We see the disconnection between people and the nature and land. We see the collapse of people, creating a lot of issues. So we are seeking the alternative around the world, especially in advanced economies. So I think this is a very important topic, addressing platform laborers, including freelancers. We need to think about the role of the government and the civil society, which are divided into three. We see workers who are highly dependent on the employer with a long-term service period. We have platform laborers working under this form of labor non-voluntarily. So we need the government strengthening regulations to protect these laborers. I think this is suitable in the sense of economic justice. And secondly, we see the dominance and monopoly and oligopoly of digital platforms. And this is reducing social welfare. So we need a policy to prevent this. And lastly, with the leadership of the civil society, we need to think about digital platforms based on community ownership, as mentioned by Professor Schneider, and also to think about platform cooperatives, mentioned by Dr. Kim. Of course, there are going to be obstacles, but if the local municipality leads this effort, it will be very unstable because when the market changes overnight, there will be changes impacting this. So I think the civil society should be leading this effort. So one thing I would like to mention is that the alternative of platform cooperative needs to be promoted to the scientists, especially computer scientists. They need to understand the existence of this platform cooperative, just like what Professor Song Ijin has mentioned. And a lot of initial investment will be needed for platform cooperatives in Korea. And to be able to support this, we need to discuss social financing and build social financing organizations in the local areas like Jeonju. With this, I would like to conclude session 1 and thank you very much for your participation. So we will take a 90-minute lunch break and resume at 2 p.m. with session 2 on DX and food platform. Thank you once again for your participation. Thank you.